Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Supatease video. And if you don't know what we're doing around here, we are testing out all the specializations moving into Shadowlands and constructing tier lists based on how fun and engaging and how long-lasting the spec is going to be, at least for myself in Shadowlands, as you're going to be making a very big commitment to a class and likely a spec. You want to make sure that you don't get bored of that spec. In my opinion, that should be the number one priority, that you're picking a spec that is going to be fun for the entire duration of the expansion, unless they dial back on a lot of this grindy stuff, which they have somewhat, but I'm worried it's not enough. If they don't dial back enough, you're going to be locked in for a ride. So make sure you're picking a spec that is going to fit for you. So that is the main goal of this. I'll be going over things that are coming back to the specialization, my past history with the spec, and in this specific video, we're doing Retribution Paladin. I've almost always had a Paladin alt, I think all the way back to how far back? TBC, I think, is when I first made a Paladin. I really loved my Rep Paladin in most expansions. I felt like maybe in Warlords of Draenor it became a bit cooldown dependent, but then in Legion I loved it with the proccing Divine Storms, which is coming back when we get to the section of legendaries and the section of conduits. If you liked that Legion playstyle where you just spin to win, spin to win, spin to win, that is coming back, and I'm very excited about it. They kept pretty much the core BFA Legion Ret, which I think worked fine for Ret. Obviously, if you're looking at it as a performer, especially in PvE, it's been one that it just needs to have its damage bumped up, and then it's competing. The main problem is that there's so many melee specs in the game that, I mean, only one of them can be number one, and there's so many of them. So you're a bit reliant on whether or not your damage is on par. There needs to be another reason to bring a melee spec, in my mind, to a group than just damage, which potentially is the case for Shadowlands Retribution Paladin. And that's more specifically with the auras that are returning. So let's just take a look at that, as that's like the first thing that's coming back. Crusader aura. Your mounted speed is going to be increased by 20%. There are conduits that synergize with this so that you would want to use it in combat, and I'll be looking at that conduit when we get to the conduit section. It's a really cool conduit, and it makes Crusader aura a lot more than just, yeah, we're running around in the world, we're having a good time. Devotion aura, which is just flat 3%. It's not the same as it's similar to the Holy One, but it's not as good in small group combat like Arena, where it would be I can't remember the exact number, 6 to 10% damage reduction for 3 players. And if you got over 6, it went down to 3. So it's just flat 3, but still 3% damage reduction for you to flip through on an aura. This one, Retribution aura, when a party member or raid member within 40 yards dies, you gain Avenging Wrath. I didn't like this in Legion. I still don't like it for Retribution Paladin. And part of me worries and thinks, like, do they balance the damage around you needing a partner to die? Because if a partner does die, your damage goes up a lot. So does that mean your damage is lower if a party... I'm a bit worried this potentially holds back the spec in terms of its competitive performance. I like the idea of it, but then the practicality doesn't work with the idea. It's not functional. Like, it really makes sense. Like, oh, my friend just died, I need to slam this guy. Like, it makes sense, but it just practically doesn't work. Maybe it should be if an ally dips below 50% health and have an internal cooldown or something, not outright die. Then you're like, oh, he got hurt really bad or something. I don't know, but outright dying makes Retribution aura a little bit awkward. And then since they've reset the beta here, I don't have it yet, you get a level 52. Think back all the way to TBC Wrath of the Lich King concentration aura, assisting your team with interrupts and silences. This is a good reason to bring a paladin, right? So if you're gonna enter, this is the problem, right? With dungeons, is you should be just purposely avoiding being interrupted and timing your rotation correctly. This somewhat alleviates the pain of it, but you probably just shouldn't have got kicked or interrupted in the first place. Maybe if there's unpreventable silences, then this would be awesome. I was thinking that it would be nice to get some finesse conduits, which are generally utility, where when you switch to concentration aura, your group is immune to silences for a small amount of time, maybe 1 or 2 seconds, 1 or 3 seconds. So if you anticipate a trash mob, it's going into a phase where it silences, and you flip over to the concentration aura to get that immunity, your casters are going to love you, your healers are going to love you. You could avoid a very important mechanic of the fight, and that would be a reason to have you as the Retribution Paladin in the group. And then of course PvP, the same could be said there. If you anticipate a silence incoming, you activate this and you're immune for, it would have to be a very short amount of time in my mind, like 1 or 2 seconds. But in general, just as a baseline in PvP, it's insane, right? 30% interrupt reduction is great in PvP because interrupts are getting thrown out left, right, and center. So this is another reason to bring back the Retribution Paladin in PvP. The downside of our auras coming back is that the blessings are lost. So Blessing of Kings, Blessing of Wisdom. Wisdom was super OP in PvP. It was okay in PvE. Like your healer would like you if you had it. And the Blessing of Kings, somewhat underwhelming. Still nice minor utility to flip around to the team. They were a little bit cumbersome because you needed to set up macros or designate them to a certain player. Whereas with the auras, you don't need an Arena 1-2-3 Blessing of Wisdom if you even had that. You probably didn't for Wisdom, or an Arena 1-2-3 Blessing of Kings. The auras are you just switch over. It's one key binding. So it's a nice little, to me, it's a little bit less of a keybind bloat in that sense, having the auras instead of the blessings, but you did lose those 2 blessings. I suppose in return, you're getting Blessing of Sacrifice as a Retribution Paladin. This is just adding some extra damage reduction utility. You could throw this onto a tank or potentially a healer. If there's let's say there's a heavy hitting dot that a monster applies to a player and the healer doesn't have a damage reduction cooldown, you can sort of fill in during that period of time. So let's say the dot applies, your healer is a druid, they Iron Bark, and then the dot applies again and the druid doesn't have Iron Bark. You can fill in during those heavy dot moments. So you'd be a nice little healer fill in with this. And then in PvP, it's multi-use. You could use it to stop damage to help someone out the same way with cooldowns. Or if you've got Avenging Wrath up and you don't want to be crowd controlled, stupid mage, you just cast this on someone that the mage is trying to kill. He polymorphs you, you're going to break yourself out of the polymorph. So it could have excellent use just in general for the game. Consecration's coming back baseline. It's nice for just finding stealth classes in PvP. Depending on the tuning of it, you might just use it when everything else is on cooldown, like you've spammed through everything, you don't have any builders left, and you don't have enough holy powers to use a spender, so you just drop down a consecration. Perhaps they tune it to be at a certain point where it's like 4+ monsters. You want to use this. I believe that it hits all enemies, so do take that into account, as I brought it up in previous reviews, is that they're limiting AoE a lot. So if you are a spec that has AoE that isn't capped, you might sneak through and end up being one of the best Mythic Plus competitively, because Mythic Plus tends to be pull everything, AoE it down as hard as you can. So Consecration isn't capped right now, so if that's still the strategy, it might be nice to have. Hammer of Wrath back baseline. This is that big execute. I believe when you activate Wings with a talent, you can also use it. So just nice to have an execute back on the Paladin. I loved Hammer of Wrath as any spec of Paladin in the past, and it is any spec of Paladin. Holy gets it. You remember the Shockadin days, expansions ago? No Exorcism, though. Just the Hammer of Wrath. Nice little execute phase. Shield of Righteous, again, they're adding back that if you were a hybrid with a tank spec, you basically get that one little tank ability. So if you needed to taunt the boss or taunt the trash mob, you could tank it for a couple of hits, soak necrotic, really assist with the tank. And you're kind of fitting that hybrid role of the healer, the tank, and a damage dealer with the Retribution Paladin with its return. You will need to make macros to switch weapons to swap this on, because it requires you to have a shield. So get those old macros that you used to have to swap to sword and board and swap over to two-hander. Doesn't mean you need to grind a little bit if you actually want to pull that off. Word of Glory, but it's not AoE. And at the moment, I watch a lot of Savic's videos, and he kind of memes on how little healing it does. It's one of those things where this is a resource-generated heal, so you're giving up a lot of damage to use it. It takes a while to build up to be able to do it. I would somewhat almost wish that it had a cooldown and healed for more. Then you've got the drawback, but you can't just only spam Word of Glories, and then it doesn't cost mana, so you just heal in PvP. I'm thinking, right, you could just infinitely heal in some cases with it having no cooldown and it being a strong heal. So I'm curious if maybe adding a cooldown. The problem with that is that it's Paladin specific, not Ret specific. So for other specs of Paladin, that would be devastating to it. It's tough now that it's just a baseline paladin ability. But at the moment, I'm worried that it just ends up kind of falling off. Maybe if you absolutely need it as an emergency heal, you use it. And then otherwise, unless they tune it, you probably just want to spend your holy power on damage. Sense Undead, just, bringing back the old times, being able to track monsters. Not really a big deal because there's so many add-ons now that just plop things down on the minimap and tell you where everything is anyway. You basically got sense everything if you download an add-on. But it's just a little flavor thing if you kind of want to RP. I think that concludes it for all the baseline paladin stuff, unless I've missed something. I'm just double checking. Moving down over into the Retribution tree. Wake of Ashes is back. This was my favorite spell. Oh, I really wish they just gave everyone their Legion artifact ability baseline after Legion. I really wish they did. Just think about Full Moon. Think about Doom Winds. Think about, they were so much fun. These spells were so much fun. At least it's coming back for Ret. It's not coming back for every spec, but hey, one's better than nothing, right? Wake of Ashes. It's slightly nerfed. It's not going to provide 5 holy power. It's only 3. So just slightly nerfed, but I would take a slight nerf for it coming back because it's such a sick ability for Paladin in general. And I believe that's the only thing specifically to Ret that's returning in terms of baseline spells. So now that we take a look over at the talents, some of them have swapped out because the talents became baseline, so they needed something to fill in. Empyrean Power, your Crusader Strike has 15% chance to make your next Divine Storm free and deal additional damage. This is what I was talking about, the spin to win Paladin coming back. Love this talent. Probably going to be what I pick all the time just for fun. And I mean, I feel like there's no way it doesn't end up being really competitive because it buffs the damage of it. So, and then maybe if you get a free proc of it, I mean, it's got great synergy potential with some of the legendaries and conduits that are coming forward for the Retribution Paladin. This tier, we've got Holy Avenger coming back, but it doesn't line up exactly with Crusade. 2-minute cooldown, 3-minute cooldown. So it's like every third. You would have to hold on to it, so it's every third Avenging Wrath you could buff, or every third Crusade you could buff. Whereas Seraphim, that's coming back, you could line up, but you'd have to wait a little bit, 30 seconds. They both don't line up exactly, but Seraphim in PvP, there's more windows. So Ret Paladins often play with Hunters in PvP for arenas. So every 30 seconds, you're really trying to get a kill. This would line up better for those windows. But if you were running with the Destruction Warlock, as it has been good for Battle for Azeroth and Legion in the past, then maybe Holy Avenger to just ramp up your max damage during the Crusade and their Dark Soul. So to me, these will likely have use in all content. And then also your Holy Power abilities have a chance to make your next Holy Power ability free and deal increased damage. So maybe some synergies there actually instead. If you just wanted to go for the spin to win Legion Paladin, you could do that, or set yourself up for some Bursty Paladin. This is a tough tier right now because they just seem all so good. Healing Hands. I personally not a big fan of Lay on Hands just because I PvP more than anything. And if you use Lay on Hands in World PvP, people say that you cheat. So... Golden, you cheat. Okay, whatever. I'm not gonna do that meme. I don't really honestly care too much about it. I guess it would be a nice emergency heal, but you could just get instant flash heals all the time, and you can use it in all content. Whereas Lay on Hands is not usable in rated PvP combat because it's higher than 6 minutes cooldown. So, I mean, in Mythic Plus, sure, if we're not doing any sort of Justicar's Vengeance builds, which most of the time mobs are immune to stuns, at least bosses, so it's tough to use this. Depends on the tuning if we are going to see it in PvP or not. And then an Azerite trait coming back here, Sanctified Wrath. Avenging Wrath lasts 25% longer, and during Avenging Wrath, each holy power spent causes you to explode for Holy Light. It could have synergy with some legendaries to allow some Hammer of Wrath shenanigans. And it just gives you more AoE. Again, it's uncapped AoE, so depending on the strategies for the dungeons and the raids and how many monsters spawn, it could have a place. Crusade, though, still really powerful, just ramping up, getting maximum burst damage. Would have strong synergies with Seraphim, granting you haste, and then, I mean, with Holy Avenger granting you also reduction, so you stack it faster. Although stacking it doesn't seem to be an issue with the maximum of 10. And then that's pretty much it for the talents. Now, honor talents aren't changing, but there are some conflicts. And I'm sorry, PvEers, if this is boring you because you don't care, but a lot of the utility being brought back to Ret baseline is nerfing durations of silences, nerfing durations of fear, and we'll get to that. Nerfing durations of fear. The Sanctuary does that, and then you've also got passive. So it seems like Sanctuary is being replaced by a bunch of passives almost. It's still probably going to have really excellent utility, but just something to take in consideration. Lawbringer is going to have insane synergy with the Kyrian Covenant when we get to the Covenant abilities. I mean, insane. I almost wonder in PvP, like, you have to be Kyrian with Lawbringer because it's so nuts in that regard. And so I'm really interested to see the synergies of honor talents with covenants, honor talents with conduits and legendaries. But other than that, there's nothing new, right? There's nothing new and exciting. Like when we looked at other specs, you're just not really going to get anything. When we look over at the legendaries, we've got general paladin legendaries, which means if you're interested in switching specs, maybe you want to go for one of these first and you don't necessarily care about being the absolute number one. I'm sure that you could get through even the most moderate difficulty of content getting one of these, but you wouldn't be like MDI, world first raider kind of, but it would fit any spec. Judgment has a 50% chance cost to reduce the next holy power spender by 1. Depending on what build you want to run, if you want to do that spin to win, you're already going to have a chance to just make it free. So it's tough. From dusk till dawn, when you reach 5 holy power, you gain a blessing of dawn, and when you reach 0 holy power, you gain blessing of dusk. It's kind of like Eclipse almost. Like you fill it up the holy bar, and then you hit that eclipse, then you empty it, and then you hit that eclipse. But when you fill it up, you get 6% damage and healing, and then when you empty it, you get 6% damage reduction. In PvP, I feel like that's pretty good. Ret Paladin struggles to stay alive and it struggles to move, so staying alive a little bit longer, getting a tad bit of extra damage as well. I mean, to me, it seems like an alright legendary. Leandrin's Fury Reborn. Casting Avenging Wrath or any Forbearance ability grants 5 holy power. It's just immediate Templar's Verdict generations. Seems pretty nice just as a baseline. You get this also as the other specs, right? So as holy or as protection. So interesting pick if you're want to play multiple paladin specs. Uther's Guard, your Blessing of Freedom, sacrifice, spell warding, or protection cooldowns are reduced by 1 second per power spent. Could be nice to get some extra mobility, especially running honor talents that make your freedom undispellable. You would also get access to sacrifice more for damage reduction and breaking yourself out of crowd control. Extra blessing of protections to immune targets and remove bleeds. Seems like it would be all right. A lot of these they feel like they have more use in PvP than they would in PvE. The Retribution Paladin specific legendaries, we got the Badge of the Mad Paragon, Avenging Wrath, or Hammer of Wrath extends Avenging Wrath by 2 seconds and deals 20% additional damage. Could be really good with some of the covenants, like the Venthyr Covenant, as it increases the damage of your Hammer of Wrath, and maybe you want to pick these legendaries depending on the covenant, so this would be a good Venthyr pick. Final Verdict replaces Templar's Verdict. With Final Verdict, a devastating strike that deals 194% of attack bar's holy damage has a 50% chance to activate Hammer of Wrath and reset its cooldown. That seems really good. It also, I wonder what this animation looks like, if it's even different. Super Final Form, Templar's Verdict, legendary, and you get a Hammer of Wrath. I mean, that stands out a lot to me, at least for single target and in PvP specifically. Now, if there's AoE ones, then in PvE, you probably want the AoE ones more often, unless there's a ton of single target boss encounters. Relentless Inquisitor, spending holy power grants you 0 haste. It's probably more than that. Holy power spent, stacking up to 20 times. Nice little scaling, at least, especially if you're running Crusade. Could be just an overwhelming amount of damage if you're able to stack this up over time, but it's still not as juicy as this one looks to me. I also just like new spells, so I want to see what Final Verdict looks like. Tempest of the Lightbringer projects Divine Storm forward 20 yards, damage to all enemies in the path, and also increases the damage. This was the Legion I remember. This was the Ret Paladin that I loved. Oh man, this is hard now. It's so hard now. This one seems insane. It's a new spell, but it's the Spin to Win Paladin down here. Okay, I've already forgotten about these legendaries in comparison to these for the Retribution Paladin. So seems like a lot of fun stuff is coming back, and there's some new stuff as well for Ret Paladin when you're going through your legendary acquisition. When we take a look at the Covenant abilities, starting off with the Kyrian. The reason that I was talking about synergy with honor talents in PvP is this one, Divine Toll. So you'll cast Judgment on up to 5 targets, and then if you remember from the honor talents, if you cast Judgment, you apply Lawbringer, which then means every time you use Judgment again, they all take 5% of their maximum health. That's insane AoE in PvP, and it's also a very short cooldown comparatively to the other Covenant abilities. You get the Vial, which hopefully is going to be usable in PvP, but in PvE, obviously, you still get the benefit. Unfortunately, you can remove bleeds with Bop, you can dispel poisons, you can dispel diseases. It would only be curses. So the secondary effect of the Steward is not as fantastic for Retribution Paladin specifically, but I feel like Divine Toll just easily makes up for it more than anything. Ashen Hollow for the Ventier Paladin. This is an ability that's received tons of criticism, I would say, of the Covenant abilities, mostly due to its 4-minute cooldown, and it's just a consecrate. You have to cast it, I believe, as well. So it's like the most cumbersome, long cooldown consecrate that, I mean, it has to be bonkers to be any good for that much of a downside. But you do get the benefit of spamming Hammer of Wrath on any target. You heal any allies in it, and you deal damage to everybody that's in it. And again, it's uncapped. So if big Mythic Plus pulls, maybe you go in for one big pull as a Rets, and you drop this, and you Hammer of Wrath spam it down. Could have potential. You do get Door of Shadows for mobility, and you can talent to get 2 of it. And mobility is a problem for Ret Paladin, so maybe the Door of Shadows mobility will make up for potentially an underwhelming main one, or maybe 2 of a heavy hand. I mean, you'd only get this every second, Avenging Wrath, if you wanted to line it up that way. So Ventier is a pretty tough sell. Also in PvP, I feel like Ventier's main point is the interrupt reductions as a passive in the Soulbinds, and you already have interrupt reductions, and I would only assume that they don't stack. If they do stack, then okay, yeah, you get that and you never interrupted, but again, as a Ret, maybe you don't care. Ventier's hard for me. And now we move down to the Necro Lords here with the Vanquisher's Hammer. As Retribution, you throw a hammer at your target, you deal shadow damage. All these things are shadow damage. And empowering your next Templar's Verdict to trigger Divine Storm. Synergies with that legendary, spamming out Divine Storm and then getting images of it. Again, you really want to look at the Covenant and the legendaries and pair them up, and then maybe there's a hidden combo that you want to go for. That's one combo that stands out specifically to me. You can single target and AoE. And then the AoE continues to extend forward. That's a big spin to win build of Retribution Paladin. They have been nerfing Fleshcraft in terms of its final form, Soulbind, which used to provide immunity when you had the shield. Now it's only immunity while you're channeling it. The channel can be interrupted. And so if you get interrupted and then crowd controlled, it will sit. Or if you finish the channel, then you become immune for 4 seconds. So much like Feral Druid, if you know you want to go in for a big crusade, but you don't want to get crowd controlled, you could just line of sight for a second, pop this Fleshcraft or bait and interrupt with a flash heal, then go for a Fleshcraft, finish the channel, be immune to crowd control for 4 seconds, and then pop off with an Avenging Wrath or a crusade, and then maybe you sacrifice to extend the time that you're not crowd controlled. I still think there would be uses for this in PvP. And then in PvE, you already have good ways of immuning most crowd controls with Blessing of Protection on physical stuns and Divine Shield to remove crowd control. So maybe it's not as much value, and it's certainly not as much AoE potential. Well, actually, no, it would be a decent amount. I feel like Necrolord could be good for everything, PvP or PvE. Getting automatic Divine Storms, run the Divine Storm Legendary. I'm liking Necrolord. Night Fae Covenants is probably the... What do I want to say? It's like it's a combination of being really awesome, but at the cost of being really difficult to use. So I would imagine that it's targeted. You bless an ally, right? So it starts as Blessing of Spring, bless an ally. I would assume you have to target them, right? It'll increase their healing by 10%. That's really good. You increase their healing done and their healing received. If a target's dying, you pop it on them. Or maybe your healer needs a boost of healing for the whole team, so you pop it on them. That's the problem right there. You got a choice. This isn't like Blessing of Wisdom where you make one macro and just don't think about it. You just press one keybind. You're going to need to consider, like, who do I cast this on at any time? If you're raiding, that's a lot of frames to click through, or battlegrounds. In arenas, you could maybe get away with a couple of macros to utilize this onto your whole team, but it seems like this could be a keybind nightmare if you really want to optimize it. After you wait, then it's going to change into Blessing of Summer. So you wait for some time, then it becomes a different blessing, which causes their attacks to have a 40% chance to deal 30% additional damage, this is why I'm saying you can't just make one macro and it casts on your healer for more heat. Then this, when it switches over to summer, which you have to remember it's switching over to summer, then remember to use it on your DPS partner, and then wait for it to finish, and it'll change into Blessing of Autumn, which causes the cooldowns to recover. So then you got to think about, okay, what classes in the game need cooldowns? Also, it seems like only allies, not yourself. I feel like if you can't cast it on yourself, though, it's going to be really odd. I mean, this would be sick to be able to cast on yourself, right? Get Avenging Wrath faster, get all your blessings, your freedoms faster. So I'll have to wait and test that out. But just take for a second that you're going to need to basically know how every class in the game works, and at every moment of a fight where they can maximize their damage as to who you want to cast this on. I mean, the skill cap is limitless, but in a sense, it might even be too much. And then finally, its final transformation, Blessing of Winter, before it repeats through the 4 seasons. Bless an ally for 30 seconds. Their attacks deal a certain amount of damage. That's a lot of math numbers. As frost damage, and you get a slow. And you can reduce their attack speed. So then you would want to switch it to your tank even. So that the tank could reduce their attack speed. Or I guess you could put it on any melee DPS. And then try and get that to assist the tank as well. So this basically covers every single situation that you would want to help your team increase healing, increase their damage, reduce the damage taken, get some more powerful cooldowns going faster. Let's say there's a boss fight where you're rotating Spirit Link, you're rotating Divine Shield, or you have to rotate a barrier, all these raid cooldowns. You could, when you know you're going to Blessing of Autumn, you could switch it to the healer and get maybe a second Spirit Link in that rotation. But you're also relying on RNG because you don't control what season it goes to. It always goes to the next one. I don't know. It seems really cool, but at the same time, it seems like it would be really hard to actually pull off. So I'm not sold on it. But fortunately, you also get Soul Shape for Ret Paladin. It's great because you don't move very fast, and it's been buffed a lot. So now it's a 50% movement speed increase, and you can blink while it's going on. And you can run some conduits to enhance its effect as well. So take that into account. You know, it's really cumbersome main build, but you do get to move, and that's a big downside for Retribution Paladin. The final section here is going to be the conduits. And for our Potency Conduits for Retribution Paladin, we've got the Light's Reach, which Blades of Justice's range is increased by 2 yards and deals 20% more damage, just kind of flat damage. It will also scale up. And then we've got Templar's Verdict has a 10% chance to strike again for 6% of its damage, which would also scale up. I wonder if the second chance to cast would also have a chance to cast Divine Storm a second time as well when you're using that legendary, when you Templar's Verdict. I'm curious if those synergies are going to be there. Wake of Ashes burns the target for an additional 10% damage. So if you really want to go all in on that Wake of Ashes, a lot of these potency ones are just going to be math, which ones come out to deal the most damage, and then you probably want to aim for which ones do the most damage at the highest conduit point, unless you're going for a world first raid kill or something. Then you probably go for whatever is available to you within the first couple of weeks of the raid that's the highest damage. Virtuous Command, bringing back Seal of Command. Although you don't get to press it, it's going to automatically trigger when you judgment, granting your Templar's Verdict, Crusader Strike, and Blade of Justice weapon a 20% chance of dealing additional 10% damage. Interesting. This one seems like the most fun, and it's extra damage. So you get fun and extra damage, or just extra damage. I guess burning them as a dot's pretty fun too. These other ones are kind of just mostly because I've seen mechanics like that a lot, whereas this one, I like the word Seal of Command from old versions of Paladin, so I might be going for this one. And it also could fit well with that legendary where Templar's Verdict has a chance to Divine Storm. These are the Covenant specific ones. So we can buff up our Divine Toll. It has a 30% chance to cast twice on any given target. Even more judgment damage. Oh my god, the synergy with the Honor talent. I mean, if I'm a PvP red, I mean, how am I not going Kyrian? I get stun reductions and polymorph reductions and root reductions. And oh man, like how do you not do that? Venthyr, Ashen Hollow, strikes the lowest health ally and enemy within its for 20% of its effect. You get a little bit of extra AoE on it, but still 4-minute cooldown. Vanquisher Hammer deals 100% more damage and heals you for the damage done. That's pretty nice. A little personal defensive cooldown. Ret Paladins are squishy. Necrolord could help you out without being squishy. You still get some damage. maybe you do want to go for Necrolord, and you can run this Necrolord Conduit. Blessing of Summer lasts 30% longer. So, I mean, they really want you to just be able to increase the damage of your team. I'm wondering how this one ends up working out. It could end up being a really top performer. It fits into, blessing your teammates and trying to increase their damage. But like I said, just having to remember to flip it around, unless it's a random ally, could be tough. Although I guess if you just cast it on yourself, you just don't care. Anyways, this one seems really weird for me. It seems like too much to think about, which is weird because I like having too much to think about, but even that's a little bit too much to think about. Endurance conduits are usually just survivability. So Divine Shield's cooldown is reduced by 5 seconds when you take damage, but it can only occur every 30 seconds. Couple of extra seconds off the cooldown. Still nice, especially for PvP and maybe even PvE, to get out of crowd control a little more often or save yourself from dying. The Golden Path Consecration heals you for 50% of its damage while you're standing in it. Get a little bit of extra utility. I feel like the Divine Shield cooldown is more value overall in the game, whereas this is... And usually there's only one Endurance Conduit when you're going down the Soulbinds, so you probably only able to pick one of these. Word of Glory applies Absorption that lasts 10 seconds for 15% of the healing on the Paladin when used. So you could just heal a teammate and it absorbs yourself. I think that you'd want the cooldown reduction on Divine Shield. Although I suppose in PvP you would want it to reduce it so much so that it lines up better, which probably doesn't. So then in PvP, the Word of Glory one. But in PvE, you probably just never want to press Word of Glory. So Consecration just heals you passively while you're plopping it down for your AoE. These ones are all equally underwhelming, so I don't think it's a big deal whichever one you decide to go with. Finesse Conduits, this is utility. Echoing Blessings. Finesse Conduit, after Blessing of Freedom ends, it increases the target's movement speed by 15%. Extra mobility, can never complain about that. Blessing of Protection or Sacrifice ends, the target takes 15% less damage. A little bit of extra damage reduction utility. Pretty solid overall. Good Finesse Conduit. Light's Barding. Divine Steed's duration is increased by 50%, so you can run a little bit longer. I almost wonder if I would have preferred this to be every time you spend Holy Power, it reduces the cooldown of Divine Steed. So you can move around a little bit more rather than increasing the duration of the one steed that you get. Maybe that would impede too much on other class fantasy, but Paladin's mobility has been definitely a lacking point in their spec. Maybe they just want to keep it that way, but this does get you a bit more mobility. I just feel like cooldown reduction on Divine Steed would have been better than increasing its duration. That way you can get it in 2 different places rather than only in one moment where you've already got back to the target. You don't even need the excessive amount of duration. Stalwart as Crusade. This is the one that makes Crusader Aura useful other than just running around in the world. It reduces all fear effects by 30%. This is where I was wondering if maybe it should be when you switch to Crusader Aura, your group is immune to fear for a second or two. Maybe you take over Shaman territory too much, but I was still thinking, like, how can you make it so you want to bring a Ret? Because if it comes down to damage, there's always only going to be one melee spec that's king of damage. So you need something else to have a reason to bring the other melee classes. So fear utility or silence utility, if certain dungeons have a lot of fear and silences and you are the only class that can deal with it or one of the only classes, then yeah, you're going to want to bring one, right? So it's nice. You just get 30% less fear. If you see a Warlock casting fear on your healer or you during your Avenging Wrath, you pop over to Crusader Aura with this and reduce it. So nice little utility there, and it makes the aura useful in combat. Turn Evil's cast time is reduced by 50%. Its range is increased by 10 yards. It's nice to have, but you probably don't need it. Like, it's nice to have, but you don't need it. You can just turn Evil Fell Hunter Pet, or turn Evil a Ghoul, or turn Evil Lich, or... You could just use it. You don't need the extra utility, it seems to me. This is a little bit lackluster. To me, Crusader Aura is insane. Getting some extra moon speed, extra damage reduction. I mean, this one has got to be the flat out best, right? There's no way, right? It's got to be the flat out best. And then this could be good depending on if fears are really a problem. So that's pretty much it for the Retribution Paladin so far on the beta. We covered its spells that are coming back. We covered the talents that are flipping in. Basically, it's taking the best of Legion Ret and, you know, the best of BFA, which was basically just pruned Legion Ret. So the best of Legion Ret, and then bringing back some of the old flavors that Paladin had in general. And it's got some nice, cool synergies with the new Covenant's abilities that are coming out. And the conduits seem to all have a place. There's a couple legendary builds that are standing out to me, and Ret Paladin still feels Ret Paladin. So to me, it's looking like a solid spec. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited to try it more as we move forward with the beta and maybe possibly playing one. I don't know as a main, but maybe an alt for myself again. Moving into Shadowlands seems great. So thank you for sticking this far through the video. I hope that you enjoyed it and it was informative to you. Again, this channel is meant to be a resource for players in World of Warcraft to make their decision moving into Shadowlands as to what class and what spec they should pick, because you are going to be pretty much locked into it for the whole duration of it. You want to make sure that you make the right one. So please leave a like if you liked the video. Comment down below if you think that I missed something or you saw a build that I didn't talk about. I would love to hear it. And again, to make this as best of a resource as possible for everybody, subscribe to the channel so you know when the videos go live, and we will see you in the next one.